Welcome back to Fresh Economic Thinking. You're with Cameron Murray. I've got a very special guest today, Konrad Michalski. You might be wondering, Konrad Michalski, who's that? Well, why don't we get cracking and let Konrad explain in his own words where you might know him from. Konrad?
Well, punters on the street might walk up to me and say, "Oi, punter, you're the guy from Instagram." And I say, "Yes, that is me," when I'm in the gym. And some guy's like, "I follow you." So my name's Conrad. I am currently making politically inclined satire clips on the internet about the issues that punters should care about when it comes to politics. So the Instagram account is Punters Politics. Probably should have led with that one. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm currently doing.
Right. And so Punter's Politics is like political commentary on social media about Australian politics. I wouldn't have thought there's a huge market for that, but you seem to be showing up everywhere. Like people actually are interested. Have you been surprised?
Yeah, both yes and no. I've been
Okay.
on YouTube for quite some time watching the US American political commentary landscape with like every
Hmm.
YouTuber under the sun giving their take on politics. And
Hmm.
I've noticed that there hasn't been much of it in Australia. There's a couple of YouTubers I follow, but not many. And
Mm.
so part of me goes, not really, because there's no one in the market, but that could be why, no one's doing it because no one's interested. But it turns out that people are actually very interested about politics. I think it's the fact that the political conversation happens on a level that they are not invited to participate on. And so I
I
guess
see.
where I see my role is taking the conversations I'm hearing with the boring political analysts, the ABC commentators, the insiders, the David Spears, and try and go, how does this impact the punter on the street that I come across? And how do I communicate it in such a way where it makes sense?
Yeah. So what got you into this? You've sort of popped up on my radar, and I wanted to reach out because I saw you doing videos about, taxing oil and housing supply debates and all the stuff that I've been interested in. How does a normal person get interested in that? I guess is my question, right? Because I understand I'm a weird guy to be interested in these niche economic topics, and here you are coming from I don't know where, getting into niche topics and putting them on social media. How does that happen?
Okay, that's a good question. Like my origin story, I was never politically engaged. I was
Mm,
probably, to be honest, I haven't probably said this to too many people. I probably didn't start voting till I was 25 or 26. I
yeah,
just kind
right.
of didn't care. And then I started listening to different podcasts like Freakonomics, and I was like, oh, actually, I think I'm interested in economics. And as I was listening to podcasts about economics that were kind of more entertaining, I
Mm,
discovered, hang on, this is politics. And I discovered that most of politics seems to
mhm.
me to be an argument about economic theory. Some
Yeah,
people want this trickle down economics. Other people think the government should stimulate more of the economy. And I realized that's
yeah.
mostly what these politicians are fighting about. So I kind of began to get interested in politics from that because I just thought there are answers to these questions. We're arguing about how to solve, like you watch America arguing endlessly over whether they should have whether they should have Medicare for all,
Yeah.
uh,
Public health.
healthcare, public health. That's what I was going for. Whether they should
Yeah.
have public health or not, and it's going in circles. And we Aussies look at that and we go, "Well, it's simple. Like look at every other country that's doing it and it's working well. So maybe you should quit your system." And we think they're idiots for doing it, but then you look back at Australia and there's heaps of things that we suck at that other countries are doing really well. So I just thought there are problems that clearly have answers, and the answers are
Yeah.
out there and clear. So that's kind of what got me interested sort of in politics.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I'm not sure how much of my research you've read, but my first book and my PhD was on political favoritism. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, a lot of what we argue about comes back to what we call in economics rent-seeking behavior. It's essentially arguing who gets the surplus. So we're a rich country, so we produce a lot of what we call surplus, and all of politics is essentially arguing about who gets it. How do we chop this up? And so we have to tell ourselves all these stories and create this mythology about capitalism or this mythology about who's deserving, right? And
Mm.
at the end of the day, we just entertain ourselves although I think my views matured a little bit, is that social order, like arguing without guns is a lot better than arguing with guns about who gets the surplus. So
Yes.
sometimes I kind of, when I need a mental break from politics, I just think, well, at least we're not arguing with guns, and we're just got think tanks putting out reports, and using the political system, and we're maintaining the social order. So that's how I
Mm,
always reflect, because honestly, it gets to you sometimes. Just this same debates pop up
mm,
every periodically for hundreds of years, right?
mm,
We had
mm.
the same debates. I write in my book the 1910s rental inquiry, when house prices were going up, right? Between 1910 and 1912, New South Wales ran their first inquiry into rising rents. I'm like, hang on, that was 114 years ago.
Mm,
We're still having
mm.
inquiries into that. Like, isn't that
Yeah.
amazing?
And that's
Anyway,
where I think people get cynical, because
yeah,
like politics is the public discussion of how we live together as a society. That's generally what it ought to be. And then what you put it in the economic speak, which I kind of appreciate, which is, yeah, everyone's arguing over who gets the surplus. But
yeah.
then, like, we're at a stage of politics, as far as I see it, as that there is so much surplus being produced, and there are current kings that have been made from this current structure.
Mm,
And their job now is to distract the population as much as humanly possible and keep having the same old perennial conversation. So now politics seems to me is the skill or practice or art form of working out what's BS, what's a pure distraction, and what's a good faith conversation of making the actual political conversation take place and move
yeah.
forward.
Well, maybe you can expand on that, while because you've said you're an outsider, right? Of this, you don't have a long history in politics. So how have you gone about um, discerning what's a good faith argument, what's a distraction, who can I listen to? Like that, I still find that difficult, right? Like,
Yes.
um, who's just in it because it suits their, like, who really cares about the logic of the argument and the evidence, and who just likes to feel good about, saying what their group and their tribe likes to say? How have you gone about untangling that, and in the process, have you actually had your mind changed at all, or learned something
Mm,
unexpected that you're like, geez, I didn't think that guy from that organization would talk sense, but I actually think he's a good, um, good faith, debater in this? Have you come across
mm.
anything like that?
Yeah, I think that is the number one question, that because
Mm,
there is now money to be made to, at like there's money to be made from pillaging democracy and pillaging the public space. This is how I'm seeing politics take place. You've got investors, like let's take the issue that went viral first initially for me, which was gas companies paying nothing, get gas for free. Qatar makes 76 billion, we make 2
yeah.
billion. It's some kind of disgusting joke. And the gas company's job is to distract us from the billions that they're making and to sow misinformation. And so now we're in the position with the internet that has all the information there, but how do we know who to trust? And that's
Mm,
been, I suppose, my journey as I became like politically
yeah.
aware. Um, but it's getting infinitely harder. So as I'm going through, I'm watching different YouTubers, different commentators, different academics, different universities, different schools of thoughts, and only by watching sort of every side of the public debate that happens, the conservative side, the liberal side, the culture wars, the economic debates,
Mm,
I I just had to learn a few things. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was that the world is full of people with incentives. And if I can work out what people's incentives are and
yeah.
what what they stand to gain,
Hmm.
that will help me understand it. And then I can work out what are people's biases, where are they coming from, what's their perspective. So I had to begin to ask these questions of who I was listening to, but then
Hmm.
I'd have to ask it of myself. And I think the starting point that I start at is that I'm an outsider. I'm a punter. I'm a teacher by trade. So I taught grade 12 economics. That's the highest I kind of got, and went, oh, this stuff's interesting. But I just have to begin the conversation with, I'm an idiot. I don't know anything
Mm,
outside of what I've looked into. I'm an idiot. And then I I think one trick I applied to the outside world as you're listening to academics is that academics are also idiots outside their field of expertise. And good academics will say, not my field. I have a professor friend and I ask his opinion. He's like, not my field, not my study. Oh, I'm not really sure. He won't give an opinion. But some people in the political spheres,
Yeah.
because they're smart in one area, they'll give BS opinions on others. And I'm just as smart as they are outside their area of expertise. So it kind of
Yeah.
began with, I'm an idiot. And who can I find experts in these areas that I can build up kind of a group of people I trust?
Yeah. So who's on the list? I mean, my experience has been that there are intelligent people on all sides, and it's still worth listening because there might be a nugget there of insight that you're not going to get from your team in a way. And so you've still got to keep that there and go, geez, that is actually a valid point of logic. We've not considered that. How do how does this fit in my picture of the world? So anyway, yeah, who's sort of on your list? Is there anyone who's sort of across the political aisle? I assume you're a bit of a lefty, like, we should all share the wealth and everyone should,
We
or
should
is that
like,
is that
well,
sort of
my
true?
thing is, I'm I'm annoying. I try to annoy people with labels and stories and constructs because the
Okay.
idea is that, like you said before, we've got a bunch of political stories and mythologies. And because politics is complicated, we've lumped it into categories and gone, you're a lefty, you're a greenie, you're this. And I think this has become lazy politics. So people will look
Mm,
at me calling for us to sell our gas to gas companies for, I don't know, some money like
yeah,
Qatar.
like
Because
a market
it's
price
a
even.
like who knows, right? And people, in the comments are like, you're a Marxist, communist, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, mate. This is cold, hard, pure capitalism. We
Yeah,
own it. We have a monopoly on it. So we can
yeah,
extort the hell out of these gas companies, just like they are doing to us. So part of me goes, there are some issues. So the lazy political engager goes,
mm,
oh, the Greens spoke about having a housing authority. You're a greenie because you think that's a good idea. And that's just coding it into tribes. Whereas I'm kind of trying to go, no, like I'm actually probably very for the free market. But I've just discovered that there's so many monopolies that the free market's not actually functioning. It needs a strong government to break it up, et cetera, et
yeah,
cetera. So I think people would code me on the left because of the issues I focus on. Because I think the biggest issues are money in politics, corruption in politics,
yep,
and they're probably the biggest ones that I always focus on. And for some reason, the people on the left are talking about those issues. So on
yeah.
those issues, yes, I would sit left.
Yeah, interesting. I actually find that the money in politics and whatnot, maybe not money in politics, but the corruption as a general issue is you get a pretty receptive audience on all sides. So my PhD
Correct.
is in political favoritism, and I found a lot of right-wing groups are like, yeah, corruption in politics. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, because we all care about that, but no one's, I'm glad we can unite, but we're actually united against the most tricky, insidious
Yes.
problem here, right? Because if there was a solution to corruption, we could point to a country and go, "There's the solution." But we're creative animals. We work around every rule that we come up with. So I do find you're right. You can find a bit of common ground, but yeah, maybe the left does talk about it more currently. That's for sure.
Well, if we're talking like left in our current political sphere,
Mm,
because that's what I've discovered. I'm trying to build on my kind of the issues I touch on is cold, hard, pure economic rationalism, as far as I see it. It's
okay.
hey, this is the logging industry. It's losing money, and you taxpayers are paying to destroy the forest. Dumb economic idea. Whereas like the environmentalists would be like, yeah, but the koalas and like, think of the trees and the birds. And it's interesting. Most of my audience is male, like
Yeah, right.
70%. And I
Wow.
think that's just kind of, that's the language I've reverted to. And obviously as an economist, actually looking at how I'm communicating, it's definitely like broad strokes and incorrect brushes sort of thing. But the message is always just look at the numbers. That's kind of what I'm really focusing on. And
Yeah.
the when I look to policy and I go, okay, who is actually voting on these issues? The conservative side of the Australian government, even the One Nation voter, isn't voting for corruption out of politics. When you look at their voting records on the ICAC and things like
Yeah.
that, I don't see the Liberal Party, the Nationals, or the right wing One Nation voting for more transparency in politics. I'm seeing that come from, and that's where I just kind of go, I look at their voting record rather than what they say, because One Nation
Yeah.
say all the right things. Lots of my
Yeah.
followers are like, vote One Nation. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, just check out their voting record. They sound great, Australia first, but check their policies.
So yeah, this is where the sort of rubber hits the road, I think, because um, you can get a lot of high level agreement that we don't want corruption, we don't want to kill all the koalas and the native birds and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Fine, no one disagrees on that, right? But then you go a step down towards, well, how do we actually resolve that issue? Because there are different ways to address it, and different people win and lose, right? Depending on the rules you implement to address the high level problem. And
Mm,
that's where the
mm.
politics comes in, because one side will say, well, we don't want to stop killing koalas if we have to pay for it, but we'll definitely do want to stop killing them as long as you pay for it, right? And
Yeah.
so you end up with these examples. And I don't know about this ICAC, federal ICAC legislation, or I sort of started zoning out around that time because it was pretty weak
Yes, that's what I've
biscuits from
heard.
what I could tell. But you end up with things like, I think it was like the Greens then voted against the carbon tax because it was a watered down type of thing. And then One Nation votes against the ICAC because you're like, well, we can create an ICAC, and there's a workable ICAC and a failed one, right? And they're both called the same thing. We both talk about them the same way, but
Yeah.
the way the rules are written really matters. Um,
Yes.
and so this is the sort of art. And I guess for me, it's not as difficult probably for you to read the legislation and understand,
I
what's come before,
cannot
because I've
and
spent
will
years
not.
working on it. And so I can sort of see, oh, this is a bit watered down. It doesn't really matter if we vote for it or not. Yeah. Have you come across that? Like, have you gone, oh, okay, well, we need to boost the offshore petroleum resources rent tax. But when the rubber hits the road, reforming the petroleum resource rent tax means either paying less when one party proposes it or one lobby group gets their
Correct.
and reforming petroleum resources rent tax means paying more if it's written a different
Mm,
way, right?
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's the real meaty, difficult part, I find.
Mm.
And my lesson, sorry, I'm taking out. My lesson is that the simplified thing is good. Now, since it's one of your you're famous for talking about getting money for gas. Have you heard about the new Queensland coal royalties system that got passed?
Vaguely. I'm flyover aware of it's the tiered system of
Yeah,
taxation where it has a higher thing when price is higher and it's still kind of lower, and yet
yeah,
the mining company, it to me, my layman's opinion of
yeah.
vaguely understanding it, you would have a better take, was it's pretty weak but it's better than nothing, which summarizes all of Labor's policies.
um, it is better than nothing. I actually think it's really good. Um, Now, I know, see, this is the difference between the broad communication that you do, where you got to paint the broad brush and go sell the minerals, get some good money, and the
Yeah.
economics, which is like, well, you do realize that every mine has a different cost profile, but they all pay at the same price. So it actually matters how you
Mm.
design, how you take that wedge for the public. And this is like the simplest like way to get that wedge of surplus, that that
Mm.
gain for the public. And I think it's been the biggest success story in Australian taxation and resource management for 15 years since I've been looking at it. And
Wow, Labor would love to hear that.
yeah, and you know what's amazing? They just slipped it into the budget, the Queensland budget in May, got passed in June. They had to start paying in September, quarter, right? This new tax. They didn't have time to sort of organize
Yeah.
against it. And what was really amazing is in the second half of that year, when they're trying to organize against it, the same coal companies had the problem, they've got too much money. They didn't know where to put it. So they have to tell their investors, we're making $20 billion and we don't know how to give it back to you without paying too much tax. Oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
the new royalty scheme's going to destroy us.
Yeah.
Hang on. Um,
Yes.
and so I think, partly it's a little bit quiet. Like my view is it's the best thing to happen in 15 years. But I think it's
Mm.
off the political radar because it's so easy and effective that if you start talking about it, the other states might want to copy it. So you just want to keep it hush hush,
Mm.
complain
They,
strategically.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because there seems to be these different levels that is a political operative on certain levels. And there's your tribal punter at the top, and he's just looking at tribes. He goes, I like that Pauline Hanson. She says shoot straight, I'm voting for her. I like the environment, so I'm voting Greens. And it's this tribal coding because it's so complex, so it's simplified to tribes. And then there's like the level where I'm kind of just one level below, just going, all right, let's look at voting records and let's
Yeah.
talk in broad strokes, because my broad strokes is like, and this would code me further left than a lot of people would go, like, if so my broad stroke is, if Qatar can make 78 billion on gas, where the bloody hell, we export more than them, why don't we have more than them? And I understand that there are complex reasons, like the level below, which is like, how do we do it, how's the policy made? And then there's another level, which is how, and this is where labor finds itself, how do we do these things if they want to do these things and not lose office? What's the political
Yeah.
strategy? And that's what
Yeah.
Queensland has gone, let's keep it quiet, let's go incremental. And I think that's what Albo seems to be doing. He's going, he's edging, he's ratcheting so slowly that people like me are just like, bloody hell, mate, like get something done, you're doing nothing. But he's so scared of losing office, he's almost ineffective now. So it's those different levels where I kind of keep coming back going, I can see the genius behind it, and I know that smarter people than me are making the policy to get these coal royalties. But then I keep coming back to the top level, being like, great, I don't care if your mine shuts down because it's not profitable. It must be a pretty crap mine. Are we capitalists or not? If you can't make money and we sell you our coal at a reasonable price, then piss off. We'll do it ourselves or something else. Like, why are we keeping rubbish companies afloat? I keep coming back to the top there, but I understand the complexities. But that's not my space. So I'm trying to push from a top level, and then have smarter people like you being like, all right, here's how we get it.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite interesting that the reason it's funny to go back to that top level, the reason you showed up on my radar, people kept sharing stuff like, this guy must have read your book or must have read your blog because he's saying the exact same thing. So when I say things like, we own the minerals, we should sell them at the market price, right?
Yes.
It's like, yeah, it's a capitalist way of looking at it. It's right wing. If I say we should tax the minerals to get the market price, it's a left wing thing. Isn't it weird?
Yes.
Yeah, I do find I think you've zoned in on some of the big issue here. So here's a question: you taught grade 12 economics. Do you think you've learned more economics since you've started doing videos, or have you considered
like
studying formally, or do you think you actually, tell me about how you've sort of improved your economic understanding, or do you think getting bogged down in the weeds is really not going to be your game? Just if you can sort of keep your bullshit meter sharp, then you can sort of float over the details without having to get into it. Like, have you learned, do you think, more economics making videos than studying?
That's the game. To be honest, I would say I know nothing about economics still. There's a level of like rote learning to it. So when I was teaching economics, I pick up the textbook and go, yeah, that makes sense. Like, and a lot of economics from where I'm sitting is, this country did this happened. Maybe we should copy it because we are similar in these ways. And then they propose a theory, they try it, and then we see if it works. And so when I'm kind of learning economics from podcasts like Freakonomics, where they just go and I don't know, like YouTube channels like Economics Explained, where they go, the economy of Switzerland is like this. And then I go, oh, Australia is similar in these ways. Why don't we also do that? And so, but the level behind it with economic theories and things and calculus, I know nothing. And so I'm just kind of like, have I learned more? Probably not, but I
Oh,
have
okay.
learned that economists are really good at, like, I listen to a lot of economists and then
Yeah.
they go, the research says this, and we could probably do this, and this might happen. And so when Australia has a problem, I go, well, like, this economist is saying that this is a good idea, or this economist is saying we tried it for 20 years, like house prices. I'm tired of bloody hearing, let's hand more money to first home buyers for a punter like me. And that's where I came across your stuff. Because for a
Okay.
punter like me, I'm hearing the same rubbish, but the outcome's still the same. And then you come along and go, Singapore's been building houses,
Yeah.
and here is what happened when they did that. And guess what? Australia used to do it too. So I don't feel like I'm learning economics. I'm just listening to what the economists are
Yeah.
saying about certain things. And because I'm more progressive, I'm like, well, bloody hell, let's try that, because I'm a millennial and I can't buy a house.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it is. It is funny how much we repeat those same stories, as you say, about housing. We come back to the same thing, the same thing. And I guess, yeah, for an outsider, when you go, oh, someone actually explained something that wasn't just the same headline. Yeah, it can definitely, definitely be um, quite interesting. So, um, to sort of get to the end of this, I wanted to see, have you changed your view on something from doing a video or trying to learn from people? Because I've got a few big areas where my views evolved once I started getting into it. Firstly, on superannuation, I used to be pretty generically in favor of it, and now I'm very much scrap the whole system. And nuclear power, I was used to be very much like, oh, that's a stupid, high risk, expensive thing. And now I'm very much like, seems to work in France and in the US and Germany. And yeah, any decarbonizing um, energy source is expensive and difficult. So, so my views
Mm.
changed a little on that. So have you either evolved your view or changed it on any of these topics, or has someone really made you sort of think deeply about one that you're like, hang on a minute, okay, that's not what I expected?
Mm.
Anything come to mind
To,
on that?
Yeah, actually, and you brought it up. Like, I was listening, and this is where I first came across your stuff, and that's where you popped onto my radar when you
Ah,
were chatting to the FIRE guys. What is it? Financial freedom, retire early.
yeah, those guys.
Financial
Yeah.
independence, retire early. My friend, who's like more of like a crypto bro kind of guy, who's very what would be the word? Just like uh, business, low tax. Your classic
Yeah.
kind of that kind of guy. And he sent me that because I'm always sitting like collectively like economic policy, like let's like how do we structure society better. And he sent me the conversation you had with the Fire podcast. I don't know, what's the podcast called?
Yeah, it's Firebug. It was at the debate with
Oh,
Scott
Firebug.
Phillips about
Yeah.
super.
I
Yeah.
Yes. And I was listening to you on super because I once again thought superannuation, yeah, I guess it's probably all right. I hadn't thought about it much. But when you laid out the numbers, like I was already to the understanding that government isn't as bad as the corporate interests paint it to be. They have a vested interest in making in telling us that government sucks and can do nothing, because then private corporation can come in and make billions. And your superannuation, when you laid that out and went, well, actually, here's hard data to show that the public service is far more effective and efficient than the private sector for superannuation on a dime. That changed instantly. I was like,
Oh,
it's
wow.
it's even more that way than I possibly thought. And that's when, yeah, so that's like a big one where my mind just shifted completely, and I kind of went,
Oh, I'm
it's not
glad.
about like the paradigm kind of breaks in the
Breaks.
sense
Yeah.
of we're told stupid political theory so that we feel like we're involved in politics. And that is always big government bad, small government good. Government spending bad, no government spending good. And people still occupy that. And your
Yeah.
example just shattered it completely and went, no, it's whether an institution can be both effective and ineffective. And it all
Yeah.
depends on its structure, how it's set up. Is there money in it?
Keep going, man. You're speaking my language here, Conrad.
and
Like, it doesn't
and
matter.
corruption. You get the corruption out and things can function, right? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Like, this is, yeah. I mean, governments, my experience working in government, working private sector, governments are bad when a topic is politically sensitive because everything keeps changing, right? So I
Hmm.
used to work in the Queensland regulator, and we'd have an announcement one morning at a press conference. Oh, councils can now do this because we want to do this, and we're like, uh, you didn't even tell us. We've been trying to get councils to do this. We had this charging regime for infrastructure funding. They just literally changed their mind at a press conference, and then everyone had to reorganize what they were doing, right? And I was in water
Hmm.
management, and it was controversial during the 2000s drought, and they would just change their mind. And you're like, well, of course it's going to be a fucking waste of money and expensive if you change your mind before anything happens, every election, every cycle. But things like, building footpaths in the street, cutting the trees at the park, you know what? It's boring. And you know what? It's reasonably efficient and effective, and no one really complains, right? And this
Yeah.
is what, when it's kind of boring and not politically sensitive, and when it's routine and repetitive, governments can just do it, right? It's just like it's
Hmm.
boring. So yeah, that's sort of my view. And yeah, look, and this is the funny thing, right? You can privatize things. Governments can just buy all the shares, right? And take the profits, right?
Why the hell not? That's the thing that I don't understand. Why the bloody hell does when Qantas is going broke, they say, here's 2 million, we'll take some shares, thanks. And we're
Yeah,
now 60% owners in our bloody airline. This is capitalism. This isn't leftist thinking. This is
yeah.
pure capitalism.
No, this is exactly. And it's funny, and it's actually difficult. Yeah, the bailouts is not difficult, right? I just said the government can now, the Bank of Japan is the largest shareholder in 40% of their listed equities, right? Because over the last few decades of stimulus, it's slowly traded out, cheap debt to people for these higher return equities. And now it's got this domestic public fund, right? Inadvertently. And, we could do that anytime we want. We just did it for the Housing Future Fund. Yeah. So I do, maybe to point you in a direction, we have these perverse examples, and I'm not sure if you've read, in Queensland, the Queensland government said, oh, we're going to privatize the athletes village for the Commonwealth Games that we had in 2018. Aren't we great? We organized this new development and then we sold it. We privatized it because we're saving you money. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It seems to be quite okay. This project looks great. I wonder who bought it. Well, it's the Abu Dhabi Investment Council. It's some other government
Oh, it's
bought
so
the
dumb.
project because
Yeah,
that government
dumb.
thought that houses in Australia
That's
were
a
a
good
great asset
investment.
to own, a great investment. And the Queensland government's here saying, no, it's a terrible,
Oh,
terrible thing. We should get rid of it. I'm like, it can't be both. It can't be a great investment
yeah,
for that government and a terrible investment for this government. Right.
yeah.
And so this sort of gets to the heart of that. It works no matter who owns it. It's just political, tribal stuff about where you end up. Right.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
yeah. So I guess you're going to come across more of that. In your
Yeah.
research. So before we wrap up, what's the next topics you're looking into? So you've covered sort of all my pet topics, housing and resources. What are you looking into now, Konrad?
To be honest, like social media functions best when you find a niche and just hammer the hell out of it.
Oh,
And at the moment, I'm just focused, like my whole focus this whole time will be around corruption, money in politics, and cost of living. Because now the rubber is hitting the road. We have had this off selling of assets, this pillaging of public assets to private corporations. And now we're all feeling the brunt of paying taxes to private corporations instead of the government. And our taxes have remained the same. And it's not playing out well. And so trying to help people understand that concept, like some of the concepts you're talking about, like basic economic management, and doesn't matter who owns it. And in fact, we, the punters, are invested if the government owns something. We can invest in services we want, and we can get a better return on investment when we collectively come together and use the government as that vehicle instead of private corporation. So cutting through that decades old lie that the private sector is there to save you is part of what I'm probably trying to hit on, but it will land home with cost of living, corporate money in politics. That's what I come back to every single time. Every single problem I see in society that we have today has come from corporations pillaging the government, and now we're paying the price. So I need to get that money out of government. That's my goal.
Yeah, interesting. Good. I'm actually surprised that you think that hammer the one message on social media. Maybe it's my economics hat. I'm always like, oh, you got to diversify.
Yeah, not on socials. Hammer. No. That's why I've done so much on the gas industry, because it's such a scam. And it takes a while for it to really permeate. And then people, this is what propaganda just does. Propaganda just, they're running that ad, that Minerals Council ad, saying how little they paid, but they think it's a lot of money. They're running it 24/7 to try and ingrain people thinking, oh, Minerals Council, oh, mining's good. And so you have to counter it in that same way, being like, here's the topic, you're familiar with it now. Here's another angle. Here's another angle.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I hope you don't get tired of that. That's how I find sometimes. I mean, you write a book on a subject, you get a bit tired of it by the end. I figure it's the same with making media as well. But good luck to you, Konrad. Why don't we wrap it up, and I'll let you get back to making these amazing videos, and I'll share on social media. Where should people go to find you? What's the best place? Instagram.
So you'll find
YouTube?
me Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook at Punters Politics. Although Punters Politics, it's an X at the end instead of a CS, because Punters Politics was taken. And on YouTube, Punters Politics.
Yeah.
I will.
That'd be great.
Just in case.
Does it record video automatically of all participants? All right. Fingers crossed. If it doesn't, then it's audio.
Sounds about right. Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3.
I don't really know how to do any of this. How do you pronounce your surname, Michael? Conrad. Fuck. There's a fucking Michael I was talking to this morning.
People are like Michalski, and I'm like, yeah, I guess, kind of.
I've got Michael here. Who the hell's Michael? Why don't we let him answer? Oh, Konrad Michalski.
I thought that was the meta joke. We don't know who Michael is.